Creation stories matter. Whether we are aware of them or not, they are embedded in the frameworks of how we live, how we interact with one another, how we perceive ourselves, and how we move in the world. We are about to enter a season of creation stories, from the creation story that we tell around the Thanksgiving table to the creation story that we tell at the end of December. We are part of creation stories right now, and so I want to begin today with the creation story that comes to us from the Iroquois Nation. And this is a story called Sky Woman, and this is how it goes. In the beginning, there was Sky World. A woman fell through a hole in the sky. She pirouetted like a maple seed in the autumn breeze. A shaft of light marked her journey down into this dark abyss. She clutched a bundle in her fist as she fell. Everything appeared to her as darkness below. But in fact, that darkness was filled with hundreds of eyes looking up at this light that had suddenly appeared. At first, they perceived just this dust mote or something coming towards them. And then as it grew closer and closer, they realized, oh, it's a woman. Her hands outstretched and her black hair flowing above her as she descended. The geese knew exactly what to do. They flew up from the surface of the water and caught Sky Woman in this feathery, warm embrace and brought her safely to the water's surface. The geese understood, we can't keep this up forever. We're going to have to call a council. It is so apparent that Sky Woman needs land in order to have a home. And so the council gathered, otter, beaver, sturgeon, loon, all talking about what they should do. A turtle, in fact, swam by and offered his back for Sky Woman. So she stood and listened as the council made its decisions. The deep divers of the group said, we have heard tell of mud that is at the very bottom of the water. And the council agreed they needed to get some. And so the loon was the first diver. He dove deep into that darkness, swimming and swimming and swimming, but the distance was too great. The pressures of the water too profound. The distance so far, and he came up empty-handed. One after another, all the fish and fowl tried for that mud at the bottom of the waters, until the only one left was the muskrat, the weakest swimmer of them all. But Muskrat said, I have to try. And so he dove into the deep water, flailing his legs as he went, as the council shook their heads in concern. They waited for a very, very long time until a few bubbles came to the surface, followed by the limp body of the muskrat. The council was so bereaved to see their dead friend. And Turtle looked over and saw that in the muskrat's paw was a handful of mud. It was in sorrow and thanksgiving that they strewn that mud over the back of the turtle. And Sky Woman was so moved by the gifts, the sacrifices of her newfound friends that she began to dance, spreading that earth hither and yon until hills and valleys were formed. And like any good house guest, she did not come empty-handed. In fact, that bundle that she clutched were the seeds from the tree of life that she grabbed at as she descended through that hole in the sky. And so she strewn those seeds over the earth, and everything began to grow. And the light from the sky made everything brown turned to green, and all creatures had enough to eat. Stories matter. How we tell stories matters. You've heard the story of creation already, the instruction story of Sky Woman, told in many forms by the tribes of the Iroquois Nation and recounted by Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She is a botanist, an essayist, and a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation. As I listened to that story, creation seems to begin in dangerous opportunity. A woman falling from the sky in fear or perhaps hope, or maybe a little of both. Creation emerges from collaboration and deep diving. Creation requires risk-taking and mutuality. Creation is generosity and sacrifice and thanksgiving all rolled into one. I hear the story of Sky Woman and my breathing gets easier. What about you? I relax. I sense trust welling up inside of me. I look at my neighbors, human, animal, plant, fish, and fowl, who accompany me on this planet, and a still small voice begins to whisper inside, we can do this. It won't be easy, but we can do this. I am one of many offering myself to something bigger. Creation is generosity and sacrifice and thanksgiving all rolled into one. And it feels good. I hear this story and I wonder what our world would look like if this was the story of instruction embedded in the frameworks of our society, the story that shaped our consciousness and how we set our priorities. Instead, the creation story told over and over again, not literally, but embedded in the patterns of our society, in our sense of right and wrong, of what is possible and impossible, what creation is here for, what progress looks like, is the creation story that comes to us through our Christian forebears and is found in the library of books we call the Bible. Even if you've never cracked that book open, you are living in the patterns set by one of the Bible's creation stories. Now, there are so many creation stories in the Bible, and given the plethora of choices, you think we would go for the first one. It would be the logical choice, it's the first, but the first one talks about creation as coming about through God looking at this soup of chaos and possibility and bringing about light and dark, sun, moon, earth, water, trees, plants, fish, fowl, and human, and calling it good. Everything is so good. Everything belongs and is so very good. But the first story isn't the story people remember, nor did it serve our 4th century Christian ancestors as they argued about whether or not Jesus was indeed God, and therefore capable of saving humanity from original sin as told in the 2nd creation story of the Bible. It is the 2nd creation story that served our Christian ancestors and serves our national mythology today, supporting structures of dominance, of hierarchies, a creation story that haunts our psyches and allows us to ignore the pain and suffering of our fellow beings on this earth and the earth itself. The creation story we all know, or at least think we know, is the 2nd creation story of the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve. God forms first man from the red dust of the earth before any plant or herb sprung from the ground. God blew into Adam's nostrils and gave him life. God creates the Garden of Eden. It's full of trees and all manner of living things, with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil at its center. All living things were man's to use and care for, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam is told, you eat from that tree, and you will surely die. God realizes it's not good for man to be alone, and so creates Eve. Skip something. Creates all the animals, and still, Adam needs a helper, a partner in creation, and so creates Eve from Adam's rib. First woman, bone of bone and flesh of flesh. All is well and good until the snake, that crafty creature, entices woman to eat from the forbidden tree. You won't die, the snake says. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil. When woman saw that the tree looked like good eating, and she would know everything, she took and ate the fruit, and then gave some to man, and he ate. 4 things happened with that fateful bite. Their eyes were opened. They see the world through their own eyes, which isn't all bad. They understand themselves as naked. A way of shame-free living is lost. Adam and Eve try to cover up that shame, and they try to hide from God. Of course, God finds them. God is God, after all. So man, woman, and snake are judged and sentenced. The snake is cursed among all animals. The woman is sentenced to pain in childbearing and to be ruled by man. Man is told, because of you, the very ground is cursed. Getting food from the ground will be as painful as having babies is for the woman. You'll be working in pain all your life long. So God banishes Adam and Eve from the garden. They live as exiles, never quite belonging anywhere, punished with hard labor, and now death as their new normal. In one analysis in the New Interpreter's Bible, a theological study of the Bible, the author states, every conceivable relationship has been disrupted. Among the animals, between an animal and humans, between the ground and humans, between human being and God, between the animals and God, within the individual self, in the form of shame. More abstractly, one could speak of humiliation, domination, and subordination, conflict, and suffering. The sentences touch every aspect of life. Disharmony reigns supreme. The Christian Protestants who came to this part of the world as part of the European expansion brought this creation story with them as fact. They didn't understand it as metaphor. They understood this story as the basis of how things are. Creation may begin in benevolence, but there are stipulations. Step over that line, and you will suffer severe consequences. Domination and subordination is the operating system of life. God over man, man over woman. Humanity does not collaborate with nature or even quite belong to it. We are aliens, exiles. Creation is stingy, and hardship is our lot. I hear this story, and my breathing feels constricted. What about you? I feel such a sense of separation and hopelessness and wondering, how we're going to get through it all. Now, some of my Jewish and Christian colleagues or people well-versed in the Bible may be cringing right now. There is no nuance in this telling, no contextualization, no counterbalance of the first creation story to mitigate the harsh character of the second. The two creation stories in the book of Genesis were placed together for a reason. They're meant to be read and understood together. But it is the second creation story that has been embedded and used as source material for our societal structures of domination, racism, sexism, ecological exploitation, and our world orientation, and why I tell it this way. Robin Kimmerer says in Braiding Sweetgrass, like creation stories everywhere, cosmologies are a source of identity and orientation to the world. They tell us who we are. We are inevitably shaped by them, no matter how distant they may be from our consciousness. One story leads to the generous embracing of the living world, the other to banishment. One woman is our ancestral gardener, a co-creator of the good green world. The other was an exile, just passing through an alien world on a rough road to her real home in heaven. And then they met. The offspring of Sky Woman and the children of Eve, and the land around us bears the scars of that meeting, she writes. We are about to enter the mythic creation story of our nation, where those creation stories meet. I would argue the creation story we tell at Thanksgiving is a cover-up story. The story of the Pilgrims eating with the Wampanoag peoples at Plymouth seeks to massage, paint over, and deliberately deceive us. It asks us to forget the real story of the Pilgrims coming upon a people totally decimated by the great sickness of 1617 through 19, just before the Pilgrims landed. A plague that wiped out between 90 to 96% of the inhabitants of coastal New England by some estimates. Not all native inhabitants had perished, but Pilgrims felt no reticence as they walked into people's homes, stealing household items. They marched to Corn Hill and dug up corn and beans to carry home. They found places that looked like graves, so they dug them up, took the beautifully crafted bowls, the pots and trays, covered up the bodies, and brought the bounty back home. Squanto, who was one of the people who taught the Pilgrims how to farm corn, squash, and beans, was able to speak English because he was captured in 1614 and sold into slavery in England and then Spain. His journey back to his homeland is Herculean. And when he finally arrived home, he discovered he was the only member of his village left alive. Everyone had died in the plague. No wonder he threw his lot in with the Pilgrims. The slave trade of native peoples was common and practiced often. Domination and subordination is the operating system of life. That is what the second creation story teaches. Humanity does not collaborate with nature or even quite belong to it. And the bodies and graves the Pilgrims found were a sign, they said, a sign sent by God. God ended the controversy by sending the smallpox among the Indians, writes the Puritan minister Increase Mather. In 1970, a Wampanoag elder, Frank James, was asked to speak at the 350th anniversary of the Pilgrim's Landing, and this is what he wrote. Today is a time of celebrating for you, but it is not a time of celebrating for me. It is with heavy heart that I look back upon what happened to my people. The Pilgrims had hardly explored the shores of Cape Cod 4 days before they had robbed the graves of my ancestors and stolen their corn, wheat, and beans. Massasoit, the great leader of the Wampanoag, knew these facts, and yet he and his people welcomed and befriended the settlers, little knowing that before 50 years were to pass, the Wampanoags and other Indians living near the settlers would be killed by guns or dead from the diseases that we caught from them. Although our way of life is almost gone and our language is almost extinct, we, the Wampanoags, still walk the lands of the Massachusetts. What has happened cannot be changed. But today we work toward a better America, a more Indian America, where people and nature once again are important. Mr. James was not allowed to read his statement at the celebration. Stories matter. The stories we tell and how we tell them matters. We are living in such disorienting times where people are feeling incredibly isolated and yet profoundly interconnected. We can see with our own eyes where the story of humiliation, domination, and subordination, suffering, and struggle has gotten us. The pandemic and the social upheaval has made the fault lines of our cosmologies and our orientation to the world abundantly clear. Disharmony reigns supreme. We could talk about this time in history as banishment, as our rightful comeuppance. Or could we entertain the idea of this being one time of dangerous opportunity as we fall through the sky, wondering what we will find in that vast unknown below? I, for one, would not know what to do with myself if I didn't have a faith community, a sense that there were a group of eyes watching, ready to catch me in the soft wings of embrace, or set me firmly on a turtle's back until I could figure out what to do next. I don't know what I would do without a community of hope that consistently and publicly reminds me to dive deep, to grow my soul, to live with generosity and compassion for myself and my neighbors, and to take my place in reconstituting the world. And this is where the creation story from Genesis starts to get personal for all of us. There is no way to live into a new world, to work for racial justice, to engage in environmental reimagining, to enter tough conversations of our time without bumbling around, without risking big and coming up empty. But when the mistakes happen, when things don't work out, we have to resist the creation story of our Protestant heritage. We have to resist the notion that creation is benevolent unless you make a mistake, and then the consequences are severe. That banishment is a justifiable sentence, that creation is stingy and hardship is life, so get used to it. We need a different story. We need a different story to create a more life-giving creation, a life-giving creation story as our true north. One that wisely asks, is whatever we are engaged in a collaborative undertaking? Does it ask us to go deep? Is there a sense of mutuality and solidarity? Is there risk-taking and sacrifice? Is it shared, not equally, but equitably? Does this endeavor feel generous? Does it make you want to dance in gratitude and thanksgiving? If it does, then go for it. As a people of faith, let us risk a new story. As we near the 400th anniversary of Thanksgiving, as we sit with circles of friends, as we gather at a board meeting or at our schools, stories that encourage a more complex and truthful telling, that encourage a sense of compassionate bravery. Let us cast our lot, Adrienne Rich writes, with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. May we do so with generosity, sacrifice, and thanksgiving, all rolled into one. May it be so, and amen.